Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. This past week I was listening to a wonderful episode from the Focused Compounding podcast, which is co-hosted by Andrew Kuhn and Geoff Gannon, who also run a fund called the Focused Compounding Capital Management Fund. And they were talking about this article that Geoff had written a while back, and I think back in 2017 it was, that really hit home for me. Really sparked a lot of interest and gave me a lot of motivation, so I wanted to share with you as well. The title of this article is How to Invest When You Only Have an Hour a Day to Do It. Now, immediately my brain went to thinking about how Charlie Munger operated back when he was first starting to learn to invest and launching his fund as well. He would sell himself the first hour of the day, as he would call it. So I think, this might be a little bit off on the times, but say from 8 to 9 a.m., instead of working on the lawyer work that was his primary occupation, he would spend that time learning about investing or researching companies or what have you. He sold himself the best hour of his day. He was intentionally carving out time every single morning before he got to, let's say, the meat of his day job to teach himself how to compound. And let's just say that probably proved to be the most valuable time that he spent probably throughout his whole life, building this foundation of investing knowledge and synthesizing all these different ideas that he's so famous for. This also really hits home for me because I have a full-time job. I'm not a full-time investor. And sometimes it's easy to fall out of this rhythm of just consistently getting after it on the investment front. Especially if you're pleased with your portfolio, there's not necessarily a ton of activity that needs to be done. However, Geoff's article, which I would encourage you to definitely read, and it's linked in the description below, really puts into perspective how important consistent investing really is. The question that was posed to Geoff goes, if one was a widely read value investor but only had 5 to 10 hours per week to spend on investing, and had less than $1 million, would you recommend a classic Graham net portfolio as the best way to make market-beating returns? If no, what other strategy apart from indexing would you recommend under these time constraints? And this is a question that I've been asking myself ever since I started investing several years back. Geoff's first suggestion right away is, instead of thinking about it as 5 to 10 hours per week, think about it as 1 hour per day. So his ask for the reader, or I'm going to talk about me in my case, is he's asking me to think about investing 1 hour a day or 5 to 7 hours per week if you break it down. Now the key is, during this time, this 1 hour, we're going to be completely focused on what we are reading. And this harkens to the name of his fund with Andrew is called Focused Compounding. One of the things that I sometimes struggle with, and I think maybe as a general society it's becoming less and less of a common trait, is the ability to just sit down and focus on something for a set period of time. So step one is spend an hour a day. And if you can't do every single day, then definitely skip the weekends. But Monday through Friday, get yourself into a rhythm of looking at some sort of investments. In the things that Geoff suggests, and which I would definitely agree with, is primarily sticking to primary sources such as 10Ks, 10Qs, annual reports, and press releases and filings like that. One of the things that we'll likely have to miss out on if we're constrained with time, and this is something that I wish I didn't have the problem of sometimes wanting to prioritize reading sort of the general news. I have a subscription to The Economist, for example, and I like to read that, but is that time, say if I dedicate a portion of my hour to reading The Economist, first of all, does that even count as investing? And second of all, is that more beneficial than, say, continuing to read the 10K of the latest daily journal filing, for instance? And ideally, during these 1 hour focused sessions, ideally you're not using that time to generate new ideas. Hopefully you generate ideas outside of that and then come completely ready to focus on, say, a new company that came up on a screen that you like, and focus that hour on a few of those companies. And a lot of the times you're not going to be even spending an hour on a single company. Maybe it takes 5 minutes to get rid of the idea. You're consistently screening through companies. But Yeah, the consistency is the main thing that I'm taking away here. So I don't think that's any surprise. And unless you are a true beginner, don't even really understand the principles of value investing, which is totally fine. In that case, I would consider reading those foundational investing books like Poor Charlie's Almanac, some of the chapters in The Intelligent Investor, Warren Buffett Way, books like that, to get you up to speed on understanding what you might be looking at when you're reading through these 10Ks. Another reason I really love this article because Geoff and Andrew's approach to investing is very similar to what I think is the best approach, which is a concentrated approach, few stocks, and really just focusing on the fundamentals of those companies. So after we've made the commitment to focusing on 1 hour of focused investment reading, the next step is to think about how we're going to construct our portfolios. Now, this is obviously completely up to the individual. Geoff's recommendation is a concentrated approach, mostly because we don't have a whole lot of time. If we're doing 1 hour per day of focused investment work, that's, if you do it every single day, 365 hours. But the more positions we have in our portfolio, naturally, the more upkeep we have for each of those positions. So there's going to be a lot of time dedicated just to keeping up with our current portfolio positions. That in turn is going to eat away at those hours, therefore reducing the amount of time we get to spend searching for new ideas. In fact, Geoff goes as far as to suggest that don't even worry about selling stocks because we're only focused on finding new stock ideas to buy. He wants to cut in half the amount of time that we spend thinking about stocks. So selling, which I think is kind of an exaggeration because there are instances where it is wise to sell, but on the whole, I get what he's getting at. He says, let's get rid of the notion of portfolio management at all. That includes thinking about things like asset allocation, position sizing, and diversification. Geoff's suggestion is a 5x20 portfolio. So that would be 5 positions at a 20% allocation each. And in order to eliminate all of these extra decision-making pieces of portfolio management, every new position is going to have the same allocation as all the rest. So it's fine to run a 10x10 portfolio, 10 positions with 10% each. But if you find a new investment idea, the one that you get rid of and then subsequently add to the portfolio is going to be a 10% position. No questions about it, no thought even required. So because the main goal is to figure out which stock is best to buy next, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to get up into that 20 position area. If you're tracking 20 positions with 5% allocations each, of course that's fine and it is slightly more diversified than a 10 position portfolio, for example. But of course there's a lot of time overhead thinking about those existing positions. And chances are having 20 positions in the portfolio, you're not going to know too much about each of those 20 positions compared to, say, if you're running a 5 portfolio or a 10 portfolio book. It necessitates that you will need to know more about those companies in order to feel comfortable, in order to sleep at night with so much money invested into just a handful of businesses. Geoff's idea is the maintenance level of idea replenishment is just one great idea per year. You have an hour a day to spend on investing. If you spend that every day, including weekends, that means you have 365 hours to spend picking just one stock. And even if you don't invest on the weekends, that's still 260 hours to find one new idea to replenish a stock in a 5-stock portfolio, if your holding period for each position is 5 years. Then he goes on to give some examples of different combinations of number of positions and time horizon. So, for example, if you own 10 stocks and hold those each for 5 years, then you have a turnover of 2 stocks for your replenishment cycle. So every 5 years, you need to find 2 new stocks. So that means that each year, you only have 365 hours split between finding 2 new ideas instead of just 1. Now, that's a huge difference. So you can just imagine what the turnover and the amount of hours you're able to spend per new investment idea if you have a portfolio of, say, 20 stocks and your average holding period is 1 to 2 years. You're really cutting down on the amount of hours that you can spend researching one single idea. This one I think is going to be the most difficult one because right now it's definitely something that I struggle with. I have probably 2 positions that are, less than 2% of the portfolio. I have some positions that are 10%, some that are well beyond that. So I kind of have a multi-sized approach right now, but I really appreciate Geoff's sentiment, and I think it will help me be a more focused investor to tweak those positions, have a commitment, maybe a 5x20 or a 10x10. Those are kind of the 2 that I'm deciding between. So that's still something I'm giving some thought to, but I can definitely see how one might struggle in that area. And then thirdly, and possibly the most important one, is having a long-term time horizon with these investment ideas. If one is limited on time, like I am sometimes, some weeks I have more time to dedicate to investing than others. The idea of holding something for the long term, when you boil it down, it really is the most logical option, because it's something that you do a lot of work up front on these companies, and then you're doing maintenance work throughout the year. And if your turnover is, say, one company every 5 years, as Geoff explains, that's 365 ideas per year dedicated to maintaining the 5 positions in your portfolio and looking for that next great idea as well. In my opinion, it seems like it's a really efficient use of the time. Plus, with this approach, it really sets the standard high for any company that potentially is going to enter the portfolio. Because first of all, it's got to be a really wonderful business to supplant any of the 5 that are in your portfolio, because the nature of a concentrated portfolio is having a high amount of money in the few highest conviction ideas that you have. So the bar is already high with a concentrated portfolio. And of course, there can be some downsides to spending that much time investing. I think Monish Pabrai gave a talk years back called Stock Research Can Be Injurious to Your Health or something like that, where the more and more time you spend thinking about a specific idea, the more you're reinforcing biases potentially. I think that was something along the gist of the talk. So it's not necessarily spending 365 hours thinking about one single investment, but it's 365 hours per year reading annual reports when it comes down to it. Making sure you're carving out that time. Andrew and Geoff expanded about this idea in the podcast episode, where, for example, Andrew gives an example of what he actually does, where first thing in the morning he will read his 10K before the rest of the world comes in needing his attention, before the rest of his work takes over. So he's guaranteeing that he's going to at least have read some type of investment work, and he's done his hour for the day first thing. Now, I know everybody's schedules are different, but making sure you're carving out time, I think, is the main driving point for this article. And there's more to this article. Geoff goes on to talk about what he looks for in companies, which is a lot of the usual metrics, high returns on capital and things like that. Companies that facilitate and benefit from a long-term time horizon. So anyway, that was a bit rambly, but I really appreciate you sticking around for this one. I will have the podcast episode and the article linked in the video description, and also link you to the Focus Compound Twitter account as well. It's a great podcast to follow, so highly recommend that. Highly recommend this article. If you enjoyed this video, you may enjoy this video over here, which is my monthly favorites from this past month. Thank you so much for watching this all the way to the end. If you like this video, please subscribe and like the video, and I will see you in the next one.